later today, 4:30 Eastern Time, to discuss the fiscal cliff, taxes on the rich. By the way, my appearance on CNBC on Friday is up now on Real Clear Politics and the Drudge Report. And I got into a heated argument with a real bleeding heart liberal who just wanted to raise taxes on the rich, longed for the good old days, the 1950s, when the rich paid their fair share. Of course, the point of my op-ed was that that's when the poor and the middle class paid much higher taxes, not the rich. They've got that backwards. I tried to point out that wealthy people would not work as hard if we took all their money in taxes or had such. And he said that's nonsense. Basically, according to this guy, tax rates are irrelevant, that you work just as hard for 100 cents on the dollar as you do for 20 cents on the dollar. Basically, his point, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, people will work just as hard for the common good as they will for their own good. We know that that is not true. We know that everywhere that we have tried this, including here in America, I've talked about that, about the Pilgrims landing in America and almost starving to death when they tried that farming for the common good mentality. It wasn't until it was every man for himself that we produced enough food so that we can actually have a Thanksgiving. But to say that rich people are just going to keep on working as slaves to the majority and keep on being as productive and as, you know, and creating all the things that they do and innovating the way they do and building up businesses, that they're going to do all that simply from out of the nobility of their heart. Right, that's sheer nonsense. But I also pointed out in this interview that I don't care what the majority voted for. He brought up the fact that, well, why don't I just be quiet because the majority wants higher taxes on the rich, and so that's what we need. I don't care what the majority wants. It's the minority rights that have to be protected. And just because the majority vote to steal money from the minority doesn't mean the minority should just bend over and accept it. And, in fact, the Constitution was written to prevent that kind of treatment of the minority. Yes, taxes are legitimate when they go for the legitimate support of government. That's what a taxation is. It's an exaction from the government on the people to support the government. It's not when the government taxes one person for the support of another person. Taxing Peter to pay Paul is not legitimate taxation under the Constitution. That's theft. It's immoral. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. It doesn't matter if people vote to steal. Stealing is still wrong. Yes, if we have taxes to pay for the general support of government, that's different. We live in a civil society. We have a government. The government can levy taxes to support the government. But we can't use the government to transfer, to redistribute wealth. People can't use the ballot box, to commit a crime. You can't steal from your neighbor. You can't do that in the Ten Commandments. You can't do that in any state. Theft is illegal. It doesn't make it legal if the thieves get together and decide to vote on the crime. Meanwhile, the victim is outvoted. He's not supposed to, that's not the way it's supposed to be. You might say that's democracy, and maybe you'd be right, which is why democracy is no good, which is why the founding fathers wrote the Constitution in the first place the way they did, so that we would not have democracy. Hey, on inflation, we got some more inflation news coming out today. The price of a subway token and a bus fare in New York City is about to rise to $2.50 from $2.25. That's 11% higher than it was last year. They also, watched a report today on airfares, which are now, holiday airfares are 9% more expensive. If you want to travel this holiday season, it's going to cost you 9% more than it did last holiday season. Gee, the government's saying there's no inflation. These are pretty big price hikes. In fact, when I was living in New York City, I moved out of New York City in 1980, went out to California. But when I left, it was 50 cents to ride the subway or the bus. And in fact, I remember on Sundays, it dropped down to a quarter, which was nice. If I went out to a party on a Saturday night and I came home after midnight, I got to come home for a quarter. They discontinued that altogether. But now it's $2.50. That's a five-fold increase in the prices, 400%. If you go back to the official CPI numbers from 1980, according to the government, prices are only up, I put only in quotes, 160% since 1980. So if you apply that math to a Subway token, the current price should be $1.30, not $2.50. So what is it? I mean, are the prices of Subways going up at twice the rate of inflation, or is the government wrong on the rate of inflation? And you can think of all kinds of other measures. I think it's $2.50 now to buy the New York Times. I think that's the price. I think it was 25 cents when I was there. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I remember. That's like that's 10 times the increase. I mean, all kinds of prices that you can think of are much, much higher. The only things that you can think of that are cheaper are, computers. And in television sets. Television sets are certainly cheaper than they were. They're cheaper and they're better than they were. And all kinds of consumer electronics. But think about this. All the things that are cheaper are the things that we import, right? They're the things that are coming in from China. What's cheaper that was made in America? Find something that's lower priced today than it was that was made in America. Because the subway fares are made in America. The newspapers are made in America. All the stuff that's cheaper is imported. And how much longer is that going to last? It's because of the overvalued dollar. It's because foreigners are subsidizing our consumption. They're absorbing our inflation. If it weren't for the fact that we can import all this cheap stuff from China and other Southeast Asian economies, can you imagine what stuff would cost? Can you imagine what television sets would cost if we had to make them ourselves? Imagine that. I mean, they'd probably cost as much as a car. Think about it. Think about how much things would cost, because that's how much they're going to cost. Because when the dollar goes over the cliff, the currency cliff, which is bigger than the fiscal cliff, because we throw the dollar over the currency cliff in order to avoid the fiscal cliff, we're going to get all that inflation. It's going to come back, and it's going to come back to bite us. And then we're going to, who knows, what the government's going to do to try to, massage the numbers. But we are going to see these prices going up for all these imported goods. Right now, it's just the domestic stuff that is more expensive. But the foreign stuff, but of course, look, we import a lot of oil. That's more expensive, too. It's the things that the Southeast Asian economies are making. And the only reason that they're so cheap for us is because of all the foreign currency reserves that are being accumulated. People around the world are paying a huge tax so that we don't have to suffer from the full effects of the inflation that we're creating, because we're not paying for all the government that we're getting.